Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek podcast. Join Ken and crew each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock for nearing the end of Star Trek Prodigy. I'm your co-host, Chief Engineer Ken Gagney.
And I'm First Officer Tiffany Bridge.
Tiffany, you know what this is, don't you?
It's the penultimate episode of Transporter Lock.
It's the penultimate episode. It's true.
For Prodigy Season 2.
So exciting. Oh my gosh. I've been waiting like 8 episodes for this.
I know you have. And I was thinking about that today while I was watching the episodes.
I'm that predictable. You know the future. You are practically a Wesley Crusher.
I'm practically Wesley Crusher.
That's right. That's right. We got 2 episodes today, episode 17 and 18 of season 2 of Prodigy airing on Netflix. We're going to be talking about Brink and A Touch of Grey.
And, you know, I think, I don't know if it's just a, different style of different writers. I felt like just as much was happening in these episodes as in the last 2, but this one was like these 2 were way more talky, right? There was just a lot more weight being borne by the dialogue. That was something I noticed while I was trying to take notes. Like I was missing recording a lot of details because the dialogue was just going by so fast.
Interesting. I don't have as many notes for these 2 episodes, and I think that's partly because I tend to take notes on action. I don't think I was aware of that until this moment, but if we were to look back at when they got attacked in the 2-part ascension, I had a lot to say about everything that was going on in those scenes. Whereas these 2 episodes, maybe we'll have a shorter podcast this week. I don't know.
Oh, I think we can find a way to talk about it.
I mean, that's what nerds do. We talk about Star Trek for longer than we spend watching Star Trek. I did notice, though, that in the opening credits, for the last couple of years, Star Trek has been modifying the opening credits for whatever show and season is airing. And this week, I think is new, is the ship that attacked them in Ascensions Part 1 and 2. It was in the opening credits.
I don't think I noticed that. I think I may have been clicking skip intro.
I'll be fair. When I say credits, I mean the swoop where they do the Star Trek logo.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So not like the actual Prodigy sequence. Yeah. That is the unique modification they made.
Yeah, that could be. I always notice Rock's face.
Oh, yeah. See, as Sabriel knows, I have never skipped the intro of any Star Trek the first time I watch it, because maybe there will be details in there that I don't want to miss, but also the number of episodes that you get to watch for the first time is finite. And I never want to miss anything about those episodes.
I think I see that. I think for me, those kinds of details are always lost on me until rewatch anyway. Because I'm spending all of my time trying to keep up with the plot, trying to keep up with the dialogue, trying to keep up with the action. That a lot of times these small details don't present themselves to me until a second or third watch. And to me, that's part of the pleasure of rewatching.
Did you watch all 5 seasons of Discovery?
I did watch all 5 seasons of Discovery. But that one released week by week, so we were watching the credits anyway.
Oh, okay.
And actually, we did some rewatching of season 2 Discovery this week, just as like a comfort TV thing. And that was fun.
I did that about a month ago. Out of the blue, I just watched the last 2 episodes of season 2.
It's nice to see the introduction of this Captain Pike.
It is. And it was the last 2 episodes I watched were the last 2 set in that era, the TOS era, before they go into the far future. And it was nice to see Spock interacting with Michael.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that when we finish rewatching the season. Because the episodes we were watching were still very much in the like, what's Spock doing? Why do they say he killed his doctor? It's like it was very confusing. It was a very confusing part of the season. So getting to the later parts is something I'm looking forward to.
Thinking back, I remember Captain Pike saying at some point in season 2, hey, maybe we'll have some fun while we're out there. And that seems like a tone that is being mirrored in the headlines of the news a lot lately.
Yeah. Well, that was when we started referring to Captain Pike as Captain Cool Dad. Or like Captain's stepdad who really wants you to like him.
Aw.
So now when we watch Strange New Worlds, we actually just call the show in our house Captain Good Dad.
Aw. Do you want to watch Captain Good Dad? I like it.
Exactly. He's a very soothing presence, okay?
He is. He is. So with Brink, season 2, episode 17 of Prodigy, they arrive at Solum, and Gwen is given the charge of leading the mission down to the planet because they are not technically Starfleet. And even Majel, so intent on joining the mission and sticking together, like Wesley Crusher advised them to, that she resigns from, she said Nova Squadron, but clearly that means Starfleet as well.
I do not think that I mean, she resigned from Nova Squadron, but here's the thing. I think the distinction there is that that would still make her a cadet and therefore not yet officially part of Starfleet because Nova Squadron gets deployed on missions. But I feel like maybe we're nitpicking this point a little bit. Or, they don't actually drop as many details in this show as I always think they're gonna. So maybe we hear more about that in the last episode still to come.
Still, I thought it was pretty cool. It was a very meaningful gesture that Michelle made.
I agree. I appreciate Majel sort of committing to the Protostar crew. But I did want to point out that actually, even before we get to that, we get a little flashback, right? The episode opens with a flashback
Oh, that's right.
to a few months ago on Solum, where we see how it was that Wesley Crusher came to be captured.
Forgot about that. Yes.
And he comes bursting in, and I don't know, he looks like he's limping. He's walking funny. And he makes a big show of saying, okay, well, you shouldn't mess with a traveler, and then like immediately gets captured. They shoot him with 2 phasers and he falls down. And even at the time that I'm watching that, I was thinking that was way too easy. Like intentionally so.
Hmm.
And then of course we'll get to that. But that was something that really stuck out to me as I was first watching it, right? Is it like this seems like Wesley just sort of walking into the lion's mouth on purpose.
I didn't think it was on purpose because we have previously commented on this podcast about how he was wrong about everything the last time he showed up. So when he says you shouldn't mess with the traveler, I was like, well, there's another thing he's wrong about.
I mean, the fact that they took down this like interdimensional being with 2 phasers was kind of what made me feel like it was a little too easy. This guy fought off like an entire ziggurat full of loom. And 2 phasers? 2 phasers. We're gonna take him down. I didn't
No,
think
he
so.
made the phasers disappear. It was that other thing that Essentia pointed at him that got him.
Did I miss that? All I saw was the 2 phasers, and then suddenly Wesley's face down on the ground.
Yeah, she was trying to create a wormhole, and he came in and like knocked the wormhole generator on its side so that it happened to be pointed right at him, and then that's what Essentia fired at him.
I did not think that was a wormhole generator. She was talking about it as the tech that powered Gwyn's escape from Solum, which we know was the Infinity.
Right, but one of the scientists said the wormhole is not stable, and she said, so stabilize it.
Oh, I might have missed that one. Like I said, there was a lot of dialogue in these episodes.
Yeah, there was. But I thought it was pretty cool how Wesley just kind of like pointed at the soldiers with the phasers, and the phasers themselves, I don't know if they shrunk or if they went to a different time and space, but they disappeared. But that is what prompted him to turn his back on Essentia, which you should never do.
Never turn your back on Essentia.
I mean, that's what my mom always taught me.
In exactly those words, my mother said that to me.
See?
Tiffany, never turn your back on Essentia. And I was like, who's Essentia? Now I know.
See, our moms knew the future. They were travelers,
Clearly.
right? This explains so much.
So Gwyn is given command of the mission.
Yes. And
They get to the surface. And what's the thing that she does? She immediately splits the party.
not immediately. First, they find out that they have been lured onto the planet into this specific building by Essentia herself.
Yes. but Essentia from the present day, not from the future. There's two Essenzias.
I love that Essentia of the present and also the diviner of the present are both good people. Like the
Yeah.
younger versions of bad people are good people.
Yeah.
Why does it never go the other way? How come people aren't like jerks when they're kids and then they grow up to be nice?
I have some theories on that are maybe a little bit beyond the scope of this podcast.
Well, if we can talk about effective altruism, we can talk about people growing up to be jerks.
Well, I mean, you've heard the saying about, people becoming more conservative as they age, right?
Which, in my experience, is totally the opposite.
Mine as well, right? The older I get, the more like cranky and lefty I become. But I'm sure that's true for somebody. That saying came from somewhere, and I don't know. Maybe those people become more and more like oppressive warlords as they age. Maybe that's just the case for some people.
I would like to see that happen. I would like to meet these people. Hmm.
I would not. I feel like I am aware of these people already, and I'm trying to outvote them.
True, but does that mean that they were nice at some point and then they became oppressive warlords, or were they just always evil?
I mean, certainly it varies from person to person, right?
I suppose. Infinite diversity and infinite evilness. So you're right. Gwyn does split the party because that was a very difficult decision. It felt very much to me like a video game. Like Dal turns right to her and says, "What's the call? Which one do we save?" And I can just sort of like see the screen get split in half and there's text and my mouse is hovering and highlighting one, then the other, and I have to click on one. Like that's really what it felt like. Oh, it's Prodigy the video game. There is a Prodigy video game, by the way. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Came out like a
That's
year or two ago.
delightful.
You can get on Switch. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. But
Nice.
I don't
That
think
sounds
it gives
fun.
you the option to choose who to save.
No, probably not.
So what I want to ask is, at that point in the episode, knowing what you knew at that moment, what would you have done?
You know, I was I understood Gwyn's position, right? She's clearly not wanting to abandon Iltheron for obvious reasons. And I see why that was her decision. But all I could think was, isn't the whole point of this to fix the timeline in such a way that Iltheron will be fine? Like, you don't actually need Iltheron for this. You need Wesley.
So you would have saved Wesley.
I would have saved Wesley and then figured out then, if that did not immediately fix the timeline, figured out saving Iltheron later.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know which I would have done. Like, they presented pretty solid cases for both of them. One is responsible for the uprising, one is responsible for the weaponry, and also one is your kind of sort of dad. I think from a tactical perspective, I probably would have made the same decision as you, but it would have been hard.
I think the reason that that they made such a point of saying that Gwyn's in charge of this mission, we're all going to follow Gwyn, was to set up how difficult it would be for Gwyn specifically to make this decision, because I don't think anybody else in the party would have done it that way. And I'm not criticizing Gwyn. I get it. I get that she was trying to do what she thought was best for everybody, but it doesn't necessarily work out for her.
Well, it's a common trope with villains in movies, comic books, etc., to present the hero with a false binary choice. Like, you can save the girl or you can save the city. Which one is it? And the superhero's
Right.
like, oh my gosh, how do I choose? And they sometimes allow themselves to get trapped in that false dichotomy, not realizing that it is false, when actually you can do both. A great example of this is the end of the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, where he has to save either this trolley full of people
Sure.
or MJ. And the answer is you don't have to choose which one to save. You can save both. And he does. And so that's kind of what Gwyn did. I really thought she was going to choose one or the other. And I admire her for thinking outside the box that Dal presented to her and choosing both.
Sure. I mean, I think it's certainly an admirable attempt to try. I just happen to remember that what we're trying to do is fix a timeline. And if we fix the timeline, by definition, Iltheron will be fine.
But it's kind of like what we were discussing early on in this season, how they're trying to fix the past while changing the future. They don't want that civil war to happen. They don't want Iltheron to grow up to become the evil diviner, even though that will also change Gwyn's past.
Sure. Sure. No, I can see that, but also like the Civil War at this point is only happening because Essentia has been allowed to get back to the planet,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because she was also out there with the diviner trying to cause problems in season 1, right? This isn't an unknown factor. We've already we know Essentia, we know she was like spying on Janeway the whole time in season 1. But so then what happens, right? They try to go execute their 2 rescues. And both of these rescues go at the time I was thinking gosh, this is going awfully smoothly. Nobody's this lucky. Especially not in a fictional situation where the conflict depends on things not going smoothly, right? They managed to rescue Iltheron way too easily. One Vulcan nerve pinch and suddenly they're on the train.
I was wondering about that because later on in the second episode, the kids are on the train in the cages and they're like, there's no use fighting it. There's no way to get out of these cages, blah, blah, blah. But they bust Iltheron and those 2 priests out pretty easily.
Yeah, but from the outside of the cages.
Yeah, but still, how did they just find the power panel and turn it off? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
Just because you're on the train doesn't mean you're able to release the prisoners. It's like you still have to find the key to open the cell.
And that's kind of what I mean, though, about it being a little bit too easy. They just glossed over the entire rescue. And honestly, they kind of did it with Wesley as well, right? They run into Wesley, and Wesley's like, "You're here early?" And we're like, "What do you mean early?"
Well, we're not there yet, though.
No, we're not there yet.
Yeah. I was wondering, the 2 priests that were with Iltheron, I don't know if they're actually priests, but that's what I'm calling them. Are they on our side now? Because I'm pretty sure they were backing Essentia earlier in the season.
I mean, I think they are part of a class of, I don't know, elders, something of the Vaunukat, but it seemed pretty clear to me from Iltheron's interactions with them that these 2 specific ones in particular are allied with him.
It does seem that way. It just didn't seem that way the last time we saw them. That's all.
Yeah, I don't know if they're the same ones, though, because they cover their faces.
And speaking of which, now that they are off the train and they're like, thank you for rescuing us, we're going to go this way now. You're kind of conspicuous in those outfits. If you're trying to blend in as escaped prisoners, maybe take off the garb that identifies you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about Vaunukat traditions, man. It was a little confusing.
None of us do.
I skipped that class in high school.
So that's how that rescue went. The other party is trying to rescue Wesley, and they're having a little bit of trouble with their cloaking device.
Yeah, with their cloak. The thing that I'm definitely not calling a cloak of invisibility, even though it operates in the plot exactly like a cloak of invisibility.
It's a little Harry Potter-ish, yes.
There's a little bit of that.
Yeah. But these are our kids who have been summoned to Hogwarts/Starfleet Academy, and now they're getting into adventures. So it's what you do.
Sure. Yeah, it's blipping and they're like, why does it seem like the guards can see us? That was actually a very funny bit to me. It was like, I think they could see us. How could they possibly see us?
The part I liked was when they realized that they could be seen, and Rock was just like, bonk, right on the head.
Yeah, Rock does not like to engage in violence, but it's fun to be reminded that she actually is quite strong and is capable of throwing down if she has to.
And that the cloaking device, even when it's not working, is still good for something.
Well, I can use it as a bludgeon.
That's right. So they get into the building and they knock out this one guard. And then while Murph is trying to squeeze through that hole that has been shot, some other guards come along. And what do? They do Weekend at Bernie's.
That's exactly what it says in my note. They straight up Weekend at Bernie's, that guard.
Mm-hmm.
It was so funny.
I don't think the Weekend at Bernie's worked like it should have, though, because I went back and I rewatched that scene and they were holding his arm by the forearm, and normally, like if the guy's unconscious, his wrist would just flop over. But his wrist was right up and it was waving as they moved his arm.
I mean, I try not to question that too much. I mean, because that was the thing. Like, he wasn't, I don't know if that guard was dead or just unconscious, um, or if Zero was somehow manipulating the muscles and reflexes um, to make it point upward instead of flopping over. But it was still a really funny gag that I enjoyed a whole lot.
This being a kid show, I'm fairly certain the kids would not be responsible for anyone or anything dying. And for Zero to be able to manipulate the nervous system of a corpse would not be an ability I want a protagonist on a child's show to have.
Well, they didn't go into details, but if we're sitting here asking about, like, if we are going to sit here and say, but wait a second, his wrist shouldn't have been behaving like that, I feel like the writers would be perfectly justified in saying, well, you know what? Zero just happens to know where the pressure point is to make the wrist go like this.
See, that's fine. Pressure point's fine. If the guy's alive, that's fine. But like, I don't want like some inquisitive kid like I would have been to go to the writers and be like, but how did they make the wrist move like that? And the writers would be like, well, son, Zero had actually killed that guard.
Here's an anatomy textbook. Go figure it out.
Right. No. Oh gosh. Any ideas or any theories as to what it was that Gwyn said to get the other three guards to walk away?
I it seemed like it was some kind of joke, right? Like they paused and then they laughed. And I don't know, some sort of coarse soldier talk. Like I think there was probably a reason they left it untranslated.
Where did she pick up language like that? Honestly, is she in cat boots with somebody?
In cat boots. I mean, you know, the diviner were there. I guess there were not any other Valnakat with them and the diviner, right? On
Not
Tars
that I,
Lamora, they were the only ones.
as
So she
far as
wouldn't
I
have picked
recall,
it up
that's
from
correct.
like maybe Dreadnought taught her.
Can you imagine Dreadnought, the most humorless robot ever, being like, I am going to corrupt this child by teaching it sailor talk.
I take issue with the assertion that Dreadnought is humorless because in our last episode when we were watching Ascension and Janeway says any attempt to fire on us will be seen as an act of war, the way he said acknowledged, like there was some sass. I think Dreadnought is perfectly capable of at least some sass.
Okay, I will give you that. Yes, I as soon as you started saying that, I'm like, oh, she's gonna pull out the acknowledge part. Yep. Okay.
It was funny. I laugh every time I see it, and I have seen that episode 3 times now.
Three times in its entirety.
In its entirety. In its entirety.
And that's not because you loved it that much. It's because other people in the family had to catch up.
Exactly. I mean, I do love that episode. However, I watched it while my spouse was away on business travel, and I was sitting down wanting to watch the episodes that we were going to record this episode about. And of course, he hadn't seen them yet, and so we turned those on, and I was going to watch them with him, but he had just gotten back from travel and he was really tired, and he decided to lie down on the couch while watching them, which was mistake number one, because he fell asleep like before Essentia appeared, right? Which is early on in the episode. He's like, oh, well, maybe I'll just close my eyes and listen for a while. And then he was just out. But meanwhile, I didn't notice he was asleep until the episode was over. And I was trying to explain, well, I said, well, she's got Wesley Crusher captured. And he said, she who? Oh, no, you really haven't seen any of this. So we watched it again today and then watched part two. And then I got to watch the episodes that we are discussing tonight.
That's a really interesting experience because, as I may have described to you, I get very into my media and I react very viscerally to things. And if I was watching that show with you, Tiffany, and I didn't respond to anything that was happening for 20 minutes, you should know that there is something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that is not necessarily how he reacts to everything. Like, it would have to be a pretty serious reveal to get an audible reaction from him. So, I was not that surprised. I just figured he was tired. He's lying down. He's watching the show. Nope, he was asleep.
Right. I'm inferring from your story that he's a more stoic observer of media than I am.
Yes, probably so.
Hmm.
Probably so. Which is a problem when I'm showing him something that I'm really excited about. And you know that thing you do when you keep watching the person you're watching it with? I can't, I have to stop doing that with him because he just doesn't react as strongly to things. And then I feel like he's reacting just so I have something to observe. And that's not nice. So I try not to do that anymore.
I think the one time I did that was I was dating this girl who had grown up in Montana and had never done any of the things that I'd grown up with. Like, had never played mini golf, had never played Nintendo games, had never ridden a ski lift, and had never seen Star Wars. So I showed her episodes 4 through 6, and when we get to episode 5, and Darth Vader has a revelation to share with Luke Skywalker, I am watching her.
Spoilers for a 40-year-old movie.
Well, that's why I'm specifically not saying it. But it turned out that like she had heard that line before, but she was lacking the context. So she didn't know what it was from really. And
Right.
so I think there was still some element of surprise for her, and that was fun to watch.
No, I mean, I love it. I mean, I remember watching The Godfather with somebody who had never seen it before, whereas I had been watching The Godfather since I was way too young to watch The Godfather. And we get to the point, a particularly tense moment, again, spoilers for like a 50-year-old movie, where Michael is heading off to murder the cop. And we were watching it on cable and it cut to commercial and she was like, can't wait to find out what happens. And I was like, oh, this is still suspenseful for you. I was like, I got to experience it through her. It was delightful.
Oh, fun. I
I
love
love
it.
watching people see great things for the first time.
It's a way to keep us young because we can only ever see something for the first time once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is, if we were to go on a wild tangent, why I don't understand the concept of gatekeeping at all, because don't you want people to love the media that you love?
Yeah, that never doesn't make any sense to me. Like, yeah, sorry, I like the thing you like. Like, what is the point in getting annoyed about it? I mean, I understand the kind of where that impulse comes from. I just don't think it is productive and something that adults should engage in.
Right. I mean, maybe little kids. Like, I understand liking video games got me beat up as a kid, and now people are allowed to like video games without getting beat up. Like, I put
Hmm.
my time in, I took my licks, and everybody else should have to do the same. I kind of understand that, but it's still stupid.
It is right. Like I said, I understand where that impulse comes from, and it comes from a real place, and I understand it, and I don't want to. I want to honor the emotional truth there while also thinking, okay, but you know what's going to prevent kids from getting beat up for liking video games in the future? Is it becoming socially acceptable to like video games?
Right. I mean, when I was a kid, I hoped for the day I could like video games without getting beat up. And here we
Right.
are.
And here we are. Guess what, geeks? We won. We
Yay.
won, nerds.
Yay.
Like, our pop culture is the pop culture now. It's time to stop gatekeeping it.
That's right. I mean, there are now nerds out there, little kids whose parents are nerds. What a
Yep.
concept. I love it.
Amazing.
By the way, the daily comic strip Phoebe and Her Unicorn. Highly recommend it because the
Okay.
kid, Phoebe, it's kind of like Calvin Hobbes, except imagine if Hobbes the tiger actually was real. It's that. And
Nice.
Phoebe's dad is like, he's like our age, and he's like always talking about, oh, Nintendo games were so great when I was a kid, and he tries to get his daughter into like playing, oh, this is a Game Boy, this is what I grew up with, and it's not a main theme, but it is a occasionally recurring gag.
My kid will be like, "Is this what you played in the 1900s?"
Yeah, the
Yes. Yes,
1900s.
it is. The late 20th century.
Yeah, 20th
My
century.
kid makes me crumble into dust at least once a week.
Well, I'm glad you are able to reconstitute yourself on such a frequent basis
It takes skill. It takes skill.
and lots of practice.
Fortunately, I get it.
Yeah. So they freed Wesley.
So then, yeah, so they walk in and Wesley's like, "You dudes are early," and they're like, "What do you mean we're early?" And then he's explaining his whole plan to them, and they're like, "I'm sorry, you knew all this was going to happen. We have been through some things." And in
Yeah.
fairness, Wesley has been through some things too, right? Like he hasn't asked them to go through anything that he was not willingly putting himself through.
Yeah. But I love his breakdown of some of the sentences there when they're like, we almost died. He's like, almost is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
But we nearly, yeah, nearly is like almost.
Right.
Yeah, no, I did appreciate the like, because it was sort of parental in a lot of ways. Because, when you have kids of a certain age, they'll come and they'll complain that they fell and and they bumped something. And like when they're little, you're like, "Oh, sweetie, are you okay? Let me kiss it." And they get a little older and they're like maybe digging a little too hard in on the complaining about the relatively minor bump they just got.
Hmm.
And my best friend's way of responding to that to her children is, "But did you die? You did not die. You're okay."
4 years ago, I was fostering these two 7-week-old puppies, Rocket and Gamora. And at one point, Rocket was running out in the fenced-in yard and he stumbled and he was just so sad and he wouldn't move. And I was like, oh no, what's wrong? And I was like, did he break something? Can he not move? And so like I set him aside into a quiet place and I, felt for any sort of lack of motor function, like I seen if he hurt somewhere. And it turned out he was fine. And I was like, why did this puppy overreact so much to just a little stumble? And my friend Bethany pointed out to me very correctly that this dog was 7 weeks old. That is
It's
not
the
a lot of
scariest thing that had ever happened to him.
Exactly. That is not a lot of life experience. Nothing worse than this had ever happened to this dog. And I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And it's exactly what you said about kids. I'm child free by choice, so I'll never have that experience, but I've had puppies. And yeah, same thing.
Yeah. I say raising puppies is not unlike children.
Well, I mean, I'm never going to claim that I know what it's like to be a parent, no matter how many dogs I'll ever have. But that's not to say there aren't similarities.
There are some similarities.
Yeah.
I would definitely grant that there are similarities.
So given that Wesley Crusher is, well, at one point in the next episode, Janeway says, like, how long has she been back from Voyager? It's been like 12 years, I think they said, or something.
14.
14, yeah. So this is not real time. It is not because Voyager originally got back in our year 2001. So that's 23 years ago. So Wesley Crusher is 14 years older than when Voyager got back.
Well, chronologically, assuming that he had,
True.
right? Like we can't assume that about Wesley. Let
That,
Wesley, because he's awfully wrinkly to be in his 30s.
that's true. That's true. But maybe his 40s.
I mean, we know Will Wheaton is like in his 50 or in his
50s.
early 50s. Yeah.
Yes. Mid 50s at this point, I think. Here, that's how old is Will Wheaton? The answer is 52. He is
Yeah.
playing with a full deck of cards. He is not one nebula short. So he has a backup plan for escaping because he can't just think them out of their predicament. And he has Rock punch a hole in the wall and they escape out into the courtyard. And that's when Wesley Crusher has a meltdown.
Absolutely melts down because he realizes that they've split the party.
Yep.
And he is big mad about it. And he was like, "I specifically told you not to do that." And my favorite part of this was Zero saying, "Well, we thought you meant like team spirit." And he was like, "No, I literally meant you should be together at all times."
I don't think that was very fair of him for a couple of reasons. One, there was a lot of this plan that he never spelled out to the kids. He really owed
Sure.
them more transparency. And second of all, if you and I talked about this when we were reviewing Ascension, if the kids had literally stuck together, that alien ship would have destroyed them. Like they had to split up. And there's no
Sure.
reason to believe that they didn't have to do so again here.
No, I agree with you. I think in Wesley's defense, he didn't realize what the path was for them all to be together for the possible outcome, the one possible good outcome, until he got Majel in the room with them. And that was right at the end. The loomer like at the door trying to break in. He did not have a lot of time to lay out for them exactly what he meant. He just sort of had to give them the quick version of the advice. But also, it is true that they've had to do a lot of improvising, and maybe he could lay off.
Right. For somebody who claims to know everything that's going to happen, why did he not see this coming to happen?
It is well, and we know though that his powers have been somewhat diminished by like months of being abused by Essentia,
Which was his plan all along.
which was his plan all along. Which was his plan all along. He did very much voluntarily walk into that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Wesley is holding a lot in his brain and doesn't always remember that he hasn't been very clear about it.
Right. However, moments later, they are all together, just like he wanted.
Exactly. Like then they suddenly are all together, and what happens?
Well, I thought that they were all going to escape together. And it was a pretty cool and dramatic moment when Gwen said to Dahl, you have to make the hard choices. I didn't realize that his hair thing was like prehensile, like a monkey tail, that he could control it.
I mean, I don't know that they've ever made it a point of him using it that way, but it did seem awfully handy as a skill to have in the moment.
Yeah. However, I'm still confused why. I mean, they all had their comm badges on. They said they had to hide them so that they could disavow their
Mhm.
knowledge and blah, blah, blah. But why could they only beam out two? I mean, Dahl specifically said two to beam up, and they grabbed the two people who did not have comm badges. Why not just grab everybody else?
Well, they specifically set up earlier at the beginning of the episode when they were kind of going through the tech they were going to take with them,
Yep.
that the short range transporter was only going to be able to take two people at a time.
Oh, they said that?
Yes, they did say that explicitly in the first few minutes of the episode.
I heard them say that they only had enough power for one beam up before they got detected, but I didn't hear them say only two people.
I thought I heard them say only two people, but again, there was a lot of dialogue and I didn't write down all the details.
Well, that would explain a lot.
Um, yeah, and so they were only going to be able to use it the one time anyway, and so they had to get sort of the high value captives out, right?
That
But
that
then that
does make
also gets
sense.
them to all stay together.
Yeah. So, yay. It was funny at the end of the episode when Wesley Crusher is on the bridge of Voyager and he says, I don't know what happens next. And I was like, Wesley, welcome to being human. Welcome to being anybody else in this show. Welcome to being the audience.
Yeah, but it has, of course, been literal decades for Wesley.
It's true. Not being omniscient must come hard to him.
Yeah,
Poor guy.
for sure.
Why do you think it was called Brink?
I mean, it is sort of a high stakes moment, right? Essentia really does feel like she's essentially won, right? She's got everything she actually needs, and she's captured the kids, and she's taking over Solum. I think that might be. I mean, it felt very Brinky, Ken.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And also, they were on the brink of setting everything right if they had just stuck together.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's all I got for this episode. Shall we move on to A Touch of Grey?
Yes, let's do that.
Now, when I originally took notes on this episode, I had to go back and confirm I had made a mistake. I, in my notes, had misspelled Gray. I spelled it
Hmm.
Gray because that's how you spell the name of the Discovery character, Gray Tall.
And
What?
the is it so the name of it is Grey?
Yes, A Touch of Grey, Grey. Star Trek is not being consistent. I mean, granted, a person's name can be spelled however you want, but why did they have to change it? And it's not A Touch of Grey Tall, just to be clear.
No,
That would be
no.
a weird crossover.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure why this episode is called that.
Hmm.
I'm like, are we talking about like Janeway's hair? You know?
Ooh, too soon.
No, not too soon. Because we lead in with Janeway writing in her recording in her log. And what's she is so tired and so kind of overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility on her that she's openly thinking about retirement.
A
Right? Like
well-earned
this whole
retirement.
opening scene is about how she's kind of getting old for this. And maybe it's time for her to hang it up.
Well, you call this the opening scene, which it is, but it's also remarkable because it's not like Prodigy to have a cold open. It always goes right into the opening sequence with the music and the credits. There's never anything before that. This time there was.
Really. I feel like it has had a cold open. Am I
Mm-mm.
wrong?
I'm the one who never skips the intro. I can tell you.
Okay, fair enough. Well, the what's interesting, the other thing that's interesting about this scene, aside from like this again, touching moment she has with Chakotay and the openly fantasizing about the farm in Indiana, is that this is the episode here picks up just a few minutes before the end of the previous episode, right? Because suddenly Janeway is summoned to the bridge and she runs out onto the bridge and then she finds Iltheron and Wesley standing there, and Wesley repeats the dialogue from the previous episode.
Yeah, we don't often get that. The same scene told from two different perspectives. That threw me a bit because I was like, what is it that she's waiting for? Because she said, like, Chakotay said, it takes patience. And she's like, I don't have a lot of that. I was like, wait a minute. Wesley Crusher just beamed onto your bridge. Why are you just sitting in your ready room? I was like, oh, because he hasn't beamed onto the bridge.
Because he's coming in right now.
Yep. I guess when you're dealing with a time traveler, this kind of opening makes sense.
Why not more timeline nonsense?
Why not? Yeah.
But then we get to sick bay, and the doctor is examining Wesley. And what we've mostly learned from here is that Wesley will recover, but we don't know when he's getting his powers back. He's kind of a plain vanilla mortal for a little while now.
Yeah, they did seem to imply if they will come back, but I think there was more emphasis on the when.
Yeah, I mean, they're just you just have to wait. You just have to wait and let it come back on its own time. And we don't know when that is. And Wesley doesn't know when that is. He doesn't know what's going to happen next, and he has no way of finding out.
Terrifying.
I appreciate it as a narrative device, though, right? Because one of the challenging things about time travel plots is that there's always somebody who can know the future, and then how do you make the drama have stakes and things like that? And now we are overtly saying, like, oh, the person who's supposed to know what happens next, he doesn't know either, and he can't find out, and he can't like it's like he's the doctor, except suddenly not the doctor for a little while,
The Doctor?
as a Doctor Who.
Got it.
Sorry, wrong dog. Didn't specify. Too many characters named the Doctor. He's not. I don't mean the EMH. I mean like Doctor Who Doctor.
Well, since you were talking about time travel, I sort of inferred, but I couldn't
It's
quite
important to
tell.
clarify, though. You're right.
So they are mounting a rescue mission for the kids down on the planet, and this brought some very funny moments down in the shuttle bay because they're building a Solum or a Valnicot ship. Don't know where they got the
Hmm.
schematics for that, but cool.
I mean, Iltheron's there with them, so
Oh, that's true. Good point. Although, isn't he like the royal astronomer or something?
he's a scientist. Go with
Okay.
it.
Okay. Scientists know everything about all kinds of science. Go with it. But there are two interactions in the shuttle bay that we've never had before. The first is Captain Janeway and Admiral Janeway.
Hmm. Right, which we love.
I wish they had sort of made more of a thing or really called it out more. It was just like some very natural dialogue. And I'm also wondering, and I'm sure she has already answered this in interviews from the first season, but how does Kate Mulgrew distinguish her performances of these two characters? Because one is clearly older than the other.
Sure. Well, and she doesn't seem to be doing it like with her voice so much, but really more in um the sort of attitude that she puts into it. Because, Admiral Janeway is like the grizzled veteran of the Delta Quadrant, right? And was Voyager her first command? I think Voyager was her first command. She'd been captain for all of 3 weeks. And then her ship and all its crew gets sucked into the Delta Quadrant, and she has to figure out how to get them home. And whereas, Holo Janeway is designed to be a training module for, if not cadets, then certainly like youthful officers. And so her demeanor is going to be a little lighter, a little warmer. She's clearly based on our Janeway, but they've definitely, I don't want to say they've nerfed her because I don't think that's fair, but they've definitely given her a more, a little bit more like warm and nurturing in a way that we don't necessarily always get to see from real Janeway.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. By the way, I just wanted to confirm what you had said because I'd never thought of it before. Was Voyager her first captaincy? And according to Memory Alpha, you are correct. She was commander of the USS Billings prior to Voyager. This is really interesting to me because that means that she was only ever captain of one ship that we know of before becoming an admiral. That is a remarkable career path.
It is a remarkable career path, but she did have sort of a remarkable career.
Right. I would say that given everything she went through and how atypical it was, her experiences were potentially more valuable than a typical Starfleet captain.
I would agree. And, something that I felt was interesting, and not to go off on too much of a tangent into 90s Trek, but something that struck me as we were doing our Voyager rewatch was that, in that first episode, when they get caught up in the Delta Quadrant, she has a way home. She has a way home, but she chooses not to take it for the sake of protecting a planet full of people. And that is just a remarkable level of poise and commitment, I think, for a brand new captain.
On the other hand, if she had been captain for a long time, she might have been like, I was 2 days away from retirement. I'm going home. I'm going to use this caretaker, go home, and send Starfleet to take care of it. Not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yeah, but I think that really gave us that sense of kind of like what kind of steel Captain Janeway is made of.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. I like that. Also in the shuttle bay, also with hologram Janeway, she gets to interact with hologram Doctor.
And were they flirting? Was she flirting with him? I think she was flirting with him.
No, I think she was fangirling. There's a difference.
I mean, there was fangirling, but it felt like flirting to me.
No, that's way too weird. I don't want that fiction. That is not my headcanon. No.
Well, I mean, because here's the thing. We know that the Doctor becomes romantically involved at various points in Voyager.
Yes.
Right? We know that is he expands beyond his programming in that particular way. The Holo Janeway, I don't know. I mean, there was definitely like it started off with the fangirling, but there was something she said, and I didn't write it down because all I wrote down was, "Oh my God, I think she's flirting." But it felt, I don't know. It could be like a Majel and Zero thing where I just need to see like another scene before I figure out what's really going on there. But it felt like maybe there was something.
I think she's also envious because she's never left that ship.
Right.
And she wishes she had a mobile emitter. She wishes she could have the diversity and plurality of experiences that the Doctor has had. So I think between admiring his books and having read it each and every single one and wishing that she could do all the stuff that he has, I think there's enough going on there without shipping them.
I didn't say I was shipping them. I just said, are they flirting?
Okay.
It felt flirty. It felt
Okay.
flirty.
Okay. So they get in the ship and they're shipping the ship down to the ship.
They ship the ship.
There's some dialogue there. A couple of things that struck me. One is Janeway says, I think she said, steady as she goes, Mr. Crusher. I didn't fact check this, but I am very confident that those exact words have been said to Wesley Crusher by Captain Picard.
If not Picard, then certainly by Riker.
Yeah.
Like that was, yes. And Wesley reacts, right? We see that remark land in a particular way for him, where he's like, oh, like This is like old times in a lot of ways for him. And it's a nice moment. It's a nice moment, which then immediately takes a turn for him when Janeway straight up shames him for not calling his mother more often.
Pack the bags. We're going on a guilt trip.
This is one of those moments when my spouse audibly reacted. He started laughing. He's like, "Wow." She was just like, "All right, jerk, call your mom once in a while, okay?" I just love that little scolding.
This implies to me that we're going to see Gates McFadden again this season.
Always happy to see Gates McFadden.
Yes, but there needs to be some resolution there. He needs to call his mother.
Yeah, that might be like the last thing we see him do is, take a minute and call Beverly.
And maybe that scene will end with her just saying, Wesley, there's something I need to tell you. And then it fades because I'm a little annoyed that Picard season 3 didn't mention Wesley Crusher like once. Well, no, I think it mentioned him exactly once. She said like, I've lost one son, I'm not going to lose another. I was like, you didn't lose Wesley. He just has more important things to do.
Yeah, but I think it would be very normal for her to just miss him a whole lot, right?
Sure.
Your kids, they grow up, they run away, they move away, and they don't necessarily come home for Christmas
The worst.
or whatever the equivalent is in the 23rd century,
Life Day.
24th century,
Life Day.
Life Day.
Yep. So they get down to the planet and they have some hiking to do to get to the facility where the kids are being held. I thought so. Not only has Wesley Crusher not piloted anything in decades, but he also forgot what it's like to use your quads.
Before we get to this, we do have to also call out the way the doctor imitated Dreadnought, but like badly. Like the voice was dead on.
That's right.
The acting was terrible.
Sounds like a real humdinger.
Okay, that was a really eerie Dreadnought, by the way, Ken.
I'm told I also do a good Jason from The Good Place. Go figure.
Another time. Yeah, Wesley's like, oh, I have to, like, yeah, like he's remembering what it is to be human at this point, like literally, like, oh, this is a lot on my muscles that I don't have to do that often.
That felt like a funny joke for a kids show because I wonder how many kids know what quads are.
That's a good question. When did I learn what quads were?
I'm still
I
not
don't know.
sure. Like I know it hurts. I don't need to know the name of it.
It was a good gag.
But I do feel like you bring up a good point. I feel like over the course of this episode, Wesley got back the nebula he was short. I think
Yes.
having all the awareness that he does as a traveler is situational, not permanent, like the effect it has
Mhm.
on him. And I think losing that omniscience and having to live in the here and now, I feel like we saw more of Starfleet Wesley than we ever have in Prodigy.
Well, and we did, and and I want to kind of also credit Janeway's moment there of like reminding him who he is, right? Like you weren't always a traveler. You were actually a Starfleet officer and you were good at it. And like maybe reach back into your brain and dig that up because we actually need that part of you now.
Right?
Because it's easy when you lose those abilities to start to feel useless.
Sure.
Um, but to be reminded that like, no, actually you already knew a lot of stuff before you became nearly omniscient. And maybe you could just go back to that for a little while and see if you can find the muscle memory, no pun intended, of being a Starfleet officer and just act like a Starfleet officer on this mission.
It reminds me of a issue of Superman, the animated series, the comic book back in the 90s, where there was this situation where like he was trying to figure out how can Superman solve this? I can't just punch this. Like this is corruption that is happening in this city. How do I solve this? And somebody was like, it's not Superman who's going to solve this. It's Clark Kent. Like you need to write an expose. And he's like, oh yeah, that's right. That's my other superpower. Like just because Clark
Right,
Kent pretends to be human doesn't mean he's useless.
right.
And Wesley Crusher, as you point out, Janeway reminded him, has all these other skills. It's not the powers of the Traveler that make him a superhero. Like, you're a superhero without the suit, Iron Man.
Right. Right. Precisely. Like before you were all that, you were this, and this is actually the thing that is most needed. So just bring whatever you've got, spaceman.
Yeah. And he also had a very touching moment with Chakotay where he says, I know it's hard to understand why I do the things I do, even for me, but you're welcome.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated seeing that side of Wesley in this episode.
Yeah, it was nice to see him it was nice to see him able to string a sentence together, which was something that was really lacking, I think. And for understandable reasons, right? He's under a lot of stress because when you have that kind of power, it does feel like it's all on you. Yada yada, something about great power and great responsibility. Whereas now all he has to be is, Starfleet human Wesley Crusher. It is actually not all on him anymore, which in some ways is kind of freeing, I think, for him.
I hope so. I hope that he feels useful in this dire situation because he is. But who are the real scene stealers here? And we haven't gotten to talking about the kids much yet because I don't really feel like this episode was about them. We see Janeway go right up to Essentia and say, I want to negotiate. I'm a very valuable hostage with all my security clearances and codes, and I think you should let the kids go. And she's like, no, I think that Voyager will be useless without you, so I'm just going to kill you. And she shoots her point blank.
I was going to say that, and we had seen earlier in the episode that everybody's like, this is a trap, right? And she's like, yes. And I'm still going.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was a very shocking moment to see Janeway shot in the chest like that. And then what happens?
Janeway starts narrating exactly what is happening to her body in response to this shot.
It was so funny because the doctor just gets hammier and hammier. It was delightful.
Which is, of course, what the doctor would do.
Of course, of course. It was like I love the way that they wrote the doctor's various like attempts at subterfuge in this episode. I felt like it's one thing to play a character. It's one thing to write a character, but writing a character pretending to be another character and that like multiple levels of artifice can be very challenging. And the acting is, I mean, of course, it wasn't the doctor necessarily. It wasn't Robert Picardo performing those scenes, right? Of course, it was going to be Kate Mulgrew and Jimmy Simpson earlier as Dreadnought, but it did remind me of Orphan Black, which is a show about clones starring Tatiana Maslany, who plays all of the clones. And there are like 6 of them in the main cast of the series. And so she is routinely playing against herself in scenes and trying to differentiate all of these identical characters. And there were multiple occasions in which she had to be one clone pretending to be another clone. And then sometimes there would even be like a third level of subterfuge. And so as an actress, Maslany would have to keep track of all of those layers of subterfuge in her performance. She was marvelous. If you haven't seen the show, you should watch it just for her. But that was something that kind of that was what this made me think of, is how much fun it is to play a character playing a different character.
Have you seen the TV series Counterpoint with J.K. Simmons?
Yes.
Counterpart, I'm sorry.
Yes, I have seen it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, for our listeners who might not, there are 2 characters that J.K. Simmons plays. They are equivalents to each other, and sometimes they pretend to be each other. So very similar to what you just described.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And to watch those layers kind of get built up in the performance is always very entertaining.
I mean, everything J.K. Simmons does is amazing.
I mean, it's true. Like, I even like his insurance commercials.
I didn't know he did those.
Farmers Insurance, yes.
Okay. As for Kate Mulgrew, there was also an episode in season 1 where she was pretending to be Doll.
Yes.
So she
Yes,
gets
indeed.
to play like all the characters on this show. She's Admiral Janeway. She's Captain Janeway. She's the Doctor. She's Doll.
She's the best.
She is. Captain Janeway, no, not Captain Janeway, Admiral Janeway has a trick up her sleeve, which I've never seen before. Comm badges can be rigged to explode.
Yeah, look, I this was a little bit of a moment for me. I'm like, if they can do that, like why do you wear them on your chest?
And also, I can think of many scenarios, generically, not specifically at the moment, where this could have been handy throughout Starfleet history.
It did seem a little weird, right?
Right.
Like she just kind of messes with the back of her comm badge and all of a sudden she can make it explode with a phaser? Really?
Is that what happened? Did she shoot it? Is that how it exploded?
Yeah, they shot it.
Okay. Because I forgot that detail. And what I was going to suggest was maybe she tuned it to emit a certain frequency that resonated with the alien technology that she attached it to, causing it to explode. But then you just came along with your phaser and like, nope.
Well, but maybe she, maybe that was the thing that maybe the phaser was the thing that it was supposed to react with. But it does seem dangerous to me to have something like just worn on your chest over your heart that can blow up with in contact with a phaser. That just seems ill-advised.
Okay, so here's a way that Time's Arrow Part 2 could have played out in TNG. Data walks into a 1800s or early 1900s saloon in San Francisco, the back room to play poker. He has no chips to throw in, so he tosses his comm badge. And they're like, "What is that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's like silver and nitrous and blah 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 and whatever." And somebody else bites into it and it explodes and the person's head is gone.
Which would have been amazing for early 90s primetime network television.
Well, this is the same TNG that had those alien parasites where they just shot the phaser at the guy's chest and his whole body exploded. Remember that?
Oh yeah, yeah, now that you mentioned it, I do remember that.
Yeah, there was a Reddit question recently. What is the most gruesome death you've ever seen in Star Trek? And everybody was like, early TNG, right then and there. Never got worse than that. 1980s Star Trek does not get more gruesome.
You make an excellent point, sir.
Yeah. By the way, when the Doctor, pretending to be Janeway, first approached Essentia turns around and says, Admiral Janeway, you've come a long way from Earth. And she says it with no accent. And I realized a moment later that she was pretending to be the ensign on the Voyager that she was previously pretending to be. But I didn't let the scene play out far enough for me to realize that. As soon as she finished saying that line, I rewound it like a couple of times. And I was like, there's no accent. Did like did they accidentally auto-tune it out in post? Like, did the actor forget to use an accent and then they didn't re-record it? What is happening here? And then I was like, oh, right, she's pretending to be human, like she did in season one, or Trill, or whatever
Right,
she
she's
was.
using she's using her Federation accent.
Yeah, because this is the first time these two characters have come face to face since then.
Right. I was thinking about that the other night. We were rewatching Justified, and I recall reading at one point that the moment when it is most challenging for an actor to maintain the accent that they're using for a character is when they're doing like a really emotional scene. That's when you'll start to hear people's accents drop. And we had just been watching an episode the other night where Walton Goggins as Boyd Crowder was having a very emotional moment, and you could hear the accent drop a little bit in his performance. Which is weird because when you're so accustomed to hearing Walton Goggins' Boyd Crowder voice and he starts speaking in his regular voice, it is very confusing.
Well, it's kind of like all these actors that we're accustomed to thinking of as American, but they are not from this country, like Lucy Lawless as Xena. Like,
Yeah.
she's from New Zealand. So that's how the doctor arrived in Essenzia's room, but the way he left confused me. It seemed like he beamed out, which he didn't, because they said before and after that scene, no beaming. But he's a hologram. So his mobile emitter, though, is physical. So how did he get out of there?
Right. I wondered about that too, right? Because he clearly, the animation clearly looked like him turning the mobile emitter off. And then I was listening for the sound of the emitter hitting the floor, and it never hit the floor. And then we see him walk up on them. So what I'm thinking actually happened was he didn't turn the emitter off. He just went invisible.
I agree.
He just made himself invisible. Like, and it took me a little while to put that together. I'm like, oh no, he just made himself invisible and like walked himself out of there. And in the confusion, she didn't notice the mobile emitter floating away, I guess. Unless the mobile emitter can cloak itself. We don't know.
I mean, the whole point of a hologram is to overlay one thing on top of something else. So maybe the mobile emitter can overlay the environment over itself.
Yeah, maybe.
Must be.
Maybe. That's my working theory until they clarify it.
A lot of headcanon in this show. A lot of headcanon.
So much headcanon. That's okay though.
So, you were saying how they blow up the entrance.
Yep. So they blow up the entrance and they let the loom out. And then there was a lot of confusion after this point for me. I'm looking at my notes about it because what they discovered about the loom is that the loom is has been captured along with them, and it is scared and lonely. And there is some debate amongst the kids about like, does it matter if the loom is scared? Do we care about that? Because it is definitely going to try to eat us and erase us from existence, whether we feel empathy for it or not. But in the end, it didn't really matter for the sake of the kids, right? Like Janeway decides what to do at this point, and they blow the side of the dome and let the loom out so that it can cause havoc and create an opening for them to escape.
Mm-hmm. And we see the loom eat or destroy or delete or whatever, some of Essensia's guards. I wonder if Essensia knows that happened.
That's a great question. Is she going to remember those people? She doesn't have temporal shielding like the Infinity does.
That we know of.
That we know of.
She does have all that other Traveler tech.
She does, but it doesn't seem to be in the immediate area where she has taken the kids to be eaten by the loom.
It may not matter. I don't know.
I mean, it may not matter. It's not like she was going to shed tears for them anyway, right? It's not like she was not going to be standing there wiping away a tear at their funerals, regardless.
Two things I will say about this loom, though. It didn't seem able to phase through matter. Maybe that's because it had that collar on. I don't know, but it was definitely muted in its ability compared to loom we've seen before. Also, when we first see this loom emerging from the pit, and like the kids are like, "Oh my gosh, no, it can't be. It's a loom." We immediately cut to the doctor climbing that mountain, narrating his progress, saying, "Danger looms."
I didn't pick that up. Good ear.
He didn't know how right he was.
He didn't, as he often doesn't.
I would argue the doctor also doesn't know when he's wrong, but
that's also true.
Yeah.
I think that is probably even more common.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, they do save everybody, and I probably should have gone back and rewatched some of this episode because remind me, like once they fly the ship away and they get back to Voyager, what was the conclusion of this episode? Like, what is happening next?
Well, so this episode they don't even, I mean, presumably they get back to Voyager, but they're having the conversation still on their replica Vonnegut ship, right?
That's right.
Gwyn is not ready to abandon Solum in the middle of the Civil War. There's an uprising happening, and we've seen Iltheron broadcast to encourage it. So she still wants to save Solum, but they've still got to get the Protostar back, and she is prepared to argue with them. She is prepared to argue her case. And they just sort of say, nope, you're right. We can't just leave them like this. So we're going to do both. We're going to save the Protostar. We're going to save Solum. And that's the end of it, right? That's the decision. It was nice that they didn't have to argue about it.
So we have only 2 more episodes of the show to go, which means only 1 more episode of this podcast. Let's get some predictions out. What do you think is going to happen to Essensia? What is the resolution for that character?
I hadn't really thought about that yet. We know that. So the Protostar is going to we know the Protostar is going to make it back to Tars and Lamora, right? They're going to fix the timeline in such a way that Gwyn is safe. But if they save Solum from its civil war, and this is where I'm confused again about the timeline, right? If they save Solum from the civil war, there was never a reason for the Diviner and Essensia to try to infiltrate Star Trek or infiltrate Star Trek, infiltrate Starfleet. It's getting late, can you tell? To infiltrate Starfleet. And so, like, how does Gwendolyn meet up with the kids? Right? Like, this is where I don't understand how they can do both. I don't understand. I can only assume that Wesley gets his powers back at some like opportune moment and finds a way for all of this to exist together. That's the only thing I can think of.
I mean, multiple timelines can coexist, as we saw with the Kelvin universe.
Sure.
Like going back in time and destroying Vulcan didn't stop Spock from existing in any timeline.
Right. But this Gwyn exists because of Solom's civil war
Right.
that she is now trying to prevent.
Right.
But they're trying to put the protostar back in Tars Lamora so that Gwyn will exist.
Right. Gwyn's existence is more contingent on Solom's civil war than it is on the protostar.
Like, that's my argument.
Yeah. I'm sure Wesley will find a way to make both things happen. Maybe, okay, there have been times when in comic books, like an entire timeline is going to die, but a character or two will escape from that timeline before it gets destroyed and move over to the Prime universe so that they can continue existing even as their universe ends. I mean, go look at Crisis on Infinite Earths. So maybe something like that is going to happen. Like, yeah, the future where Solom has a civil war ceases to exist, but Wesley Crusher will cut and paste Gwyn from there to here.
Right. Or, I mean, the Civil War has already started, right? And Iltheron is clearly a key figure in it. But maybe he takes a different tactic and doesn't become the diviner, right? But the thing that's really baking my noodle is that it's Essentia starting the Civil War. I mean, she is precipitating the Civil War, right? The uprising starts it, but she is causing the Civil War through her heavy-handed oppression. And she's only there, right? Like in the original version of the story, it's that Solom couldn't handle contact with, like, first contact with Starfleet, and that is what set them on the path to Civil War. And in this case, it's Essentia. It's their fear of, it's their xenophobia and fear that actually causes the Civil War, which is how Civil Wars tend to start. Now that I say that out loud, but yeah, this is where like the timeline gets very wibbly wobbly for me.
But Essentia, it's also a causality loop. She's trying to create the civil war that allows herself to exist.
Right.
It's like Skynet.
Yes. It's very confusing.
But I'm sure Wesley Crusher will play a pivotal role in the resolution.
Yes, I'm certain of it. I'm certain he gets his powers back by the end of this.
But I don't know what happens to her because it occurred to me, could she get eaten by a loom? And I'm like, on one hand, that would be poetic justice, but on the other hand, nobody else on the show would even know she existed. You have
That
to,
would really screw with the timeline.
not only would it screw with the timeline, but like, you have to, in order for there to be a victory, you need to realize that there has been a victory.
Right.
And you can't have a victory if the person you've been fighting against, you're not even aware ever existed.
Well, and this really does kind of get to a little bit of the sort of confusing bit about the loom as a plot device, right? If they could wipe you from existence, like you've never existed, it seems like we'd be having It's a Wonderful Life all over the place,
Hmm.
right? Because even though those like red shirt crewmen were not that important to the history of Voyager, they were important to somebody.
That's right.
And how many of those people could get eaten and erased from existence before it really starts to impact things?
So if the loom eats a dad, does that mean the dad's kid never exists either?
I have so many questions. Like, are the Loom wiping out entire bloodlines? And what are the implications for the universe if they can do that? At some point, they're going to eat somebody that has implications.
Right. And you would think that Essentia, instead of just capturing one, would learn to weaponize that. Like, if she could make a loom gun that erases people, she'd be unstoppable.
Oh, completely unstoppable. I mean, I don't really want to contemplate that future.
But what if you made a loom gun and then shot yourself, but you're the one who invented the gun?
The fabric of space time would be destroyed. It would be paradox.
which is just another week on Star Trek. So we still don't know, even after having talked about it, why it's called A Touch of Grey.
We don't. We don't know why it's called A Touch of Grey. I'm not sure. I truly am not.
There have been scenes where they're in the Voyager mess hall, and if only like they've been having a sandwich and like, can you imagine Jenkum Pog saying, "Does anybody have any Grey Poupon?" Like, oh, here's a touch of Grey.
Uh,
But no, it's not that. So we have, like I said, just 2 more episodes left. This is our penultimate episode, which means the next one will
indeed it
be.
is. The ultimate episode.
That's right. That's right. People forget that ultimate means last. So when Taco Bell advertises the ultimate taco, that's the last taco you're ever going to have.
It's the last taco you will ever need.
That's right. That's right.
That's ominous.
Just like a taco from Taco Bell through your digestive system, we're going to
Go fast.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.
I can't believe you made that joke.
You're welcome.
Amazing.